right, hi everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for this week's Snack and Chat. I know we were off last week. Well, I was off last week, so I hope you're back with us this week where we do our Facebook Live. We explore different topics that can be top of mind for families formed by adoption, kinship, and customary care. Today, my guest is Frances Elizabeth Moore, and she's here to talk about nurturing the connection to land, language, and culture for Indigenous children. For those of you that are new here, my name is Chantal. I'm the Community Engagement Liaison with Adopt for Life. So if you're watching live, or maybe you're watching this later on replay, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Feel free to ask your questions or put your comments in the chat. I'll just take a brief moment to remind you that the live stream is on our public Facebook page. So whatever you put in the comments is going to be publicly available. So if you are asking a question about your child, please be mindful and not put any identifiable information. So no names or health information, things like that. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear from you, and we hope that you find today's discussion informative and engaging. I know I'm really looking forward to it. So before we jump into the many questions we have, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce Frances to everyone. Frances Elizabeth Moore is Anishinaabe Kwe from Timiskaming First Nations, who has been living in London for 16 years. Frances Elizabeth is passionate about Indigenous rights, issues, politics, and general social justice. Drawing on her legal background from Georgian College, certificates in Indigegogy from Wilfred Laurier University, and building abundance in Indigenous communities from COADY Institute at St. Francis Xavier University. She has over 10 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion through relationship building and program management. Frances Elizabeth is currently the Family Center Manager at Nshwaasnangong. Okay, sorry. Nshwaasnangong. You're gonna help me with that again. The Child Care and Family Center, which is an Indigenous-led childcare and family center in London, Ontario, that recently opened in November of 2021. She also teaches with the London District Catholic School Board, as well as doing independent workshops and consulting. And in addition to this, she is a dedicated community volunteer working with various organizations across the city of London, and is a member of London's Indigenous Leadership Circle member and Aboriginal Professional Association of Canada. So thank you so much, Frances, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us.
Welcome to my lunch hour.
Lunch hour with Frances.
Well, I appreciate those coming out. As Chantal mentioned, my name is Frances Elizabeth Moore. I'm from Timiskaming First Nations. I'm a member of the BAIC clan. I've been here in London for 16 years, and that's an easy one to remember because my son is 16. We moved here when he was first born. I'm a mom and an auntie. I recognize that that introduction that I, just did, a lot of folks aren't necessarily, familiar with how we introduce ourselves as Indigenous peoples. And that introduction is relational accountability. It gives you, my name, my community, my clan. It connects me back to my family. So if I misbehave, my aunties can handle me. So for those that haven't come across me before, 18 months ago, I moved into this particular role with SOHAC at Nshwaasnangong as the Family Center Manager, which opened up recently in Soho here in London. For those that have little ones, I encourage you, to visit our Facebook, visit our Instagram, see the programming that we have. Come out and join us. I myself am responsible for early on programming, but we do have a childcare as well. So if you, obviously if you have Indigenous children, whether they be status or non, they can access the childcare, and you can do that through the website. I, like Chantal said, I also teach at the London District Catholic School Board. Previous to this particular role, I was the Director of Operations and Outreach at We Matter, which is an organization that focuses on the mental health and wellness of Indigenous youth, specifically around suicide prevention. And I also taught at the Anishinaabe Educational Institute on Muncie, Delaware First Nation. I currently, and I probably will be there until my son can take over, I'm the president of the board of directors at Lifespin here in London. As Chantal mentioned, I'm a member of the Indigenous Leadership Circle. I work with Pillar, and I do my own, consulting work on the side. I'm not one to stay stagnant or still, and during the pandemic, I've certainly kind of kept myself busy with different things. With all that being said and done, it boils down to I'm Frances Elizabeth Moore. I'm Anishinaabe Kwe from Timiskaming First Nations, and I'm a mom and an auntie.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks again for being here. We already have Courtney saying hi to you.
Hi, Courtney.
So we have a lot of things to cover, and we have not too much time. So I'm just going to jump into our questions. Is that good with you? All right. So land, language, and culture, like I said, big topics, nurturing the connection in children and youth. I know we don't have a lot of time, but maybe you could share with the viewers who are parents and caregivers across Ontario about some of these teachings, the interconnectedness of those, and the importance of nurturing those connections.
Yeah, so, I'm speaking broadly, I'm saying Indigenous folks, but I'm really speaking from the Anishinaabe perspective. So just keep that in mind. But Indigenous folks often place land at the center of our cultures. We see it as a reciprocal relationship. Many Indigenous nations have stewarded the land for generations and have intimate knowledge and understanding about the land that Western culture just doesn't. However, with that being said, I recognize that about half of Canada's Indigenous population now really does live in urban areas. And Indigenous communities struggle to, overcome legacies of colonization defined by assimilation and land theft. That connection isn't as strong as it, was pre-contact. Being able to connect with community, be mentored by elders, work with community members who are artists, community leaders, storytellers, other Indigenous young people, ultimately that helps strengthen that sense of indigeneity. Participating in cultural workshops, art-based activities, ceremonies, sweat lodges, accessing medicine, storytelling sessions, etc., with a focus on those Indigenous teachings is really important to Indigenous youth. I think one of the things, when I think about our community, we often have children with us. It's not always, this is only for adults. This is, just for kids. I think of a lot of the ceremonies and a lot of the events that I've been to over the years with my son. Children are playing and doing their own thing, but they're still learning and picking things up. And I think it probably really wasn't until the past 2 years where I recognized how much my son had actually picked up over the years, just overhearing conversations, sitting in ceremony. So I think it's important to connect to the community in various different ways. Obviously showing up once a year to an event isn't going to foster that sense of identity because it's so ingrained in our community and our everyday lives, from the way that we parent a lot. I run a Nshwaasnangong, we have a food program, what we put into our bodies. It's all largely centered around our relationship with the land.
Yeah, I think that's important to say that kids don't just learn when you decide, okay, we're going to go learn about this. They're learning all the time, absorbing, listening, and it all takes, shape as they're growing. Okay, so you mentioned identity, so we're gonna segue right into another big topic. So identity is identified as one of the main core issues in adoption and permanency as children and youth navigate that journey. What advice would you have to share with our community of adoptive kin, customary care parents and caregivers or families that are raising an Indigenous child? Specifically about the importance of, like you mentioned in the previously, promoting that healthy connection and not making it just like this once a year event type situation.
Yeah, so I know it can be difficult to, a difficult process to secure the information, but learning the specific Indigenous background of the child that you're fostering is really important. Indigenous is broken up into First Nations, and there's like 630 First Nations communities representing about 50 nations in the country. Metis, I believe there's 8 Metis settlements, Inuit with 4 different regions. So it's important to know what they are. And, with each different nation, community, settlements, regions, we all have different cultures, beliefs, and traditions. So it's important you learn as much as you can about your child's background, as that way you're passing on the correct knowledge and information as much as you can. We want to avoid co-opting other Indigenous cultures or pan-indigenizing or generalizing. But once you have that information, it's certainly a lot easier to connect with the most appropriate resources, organizations that would facilitate things like language and culture. I know that it's not always easy, with things like the 60 scoop, millennial scoop. You don't have all of the information, but if you can gather as much information as you can, and have some of those conversations with Indigenous folks, they can generally kind of, point you in the right direction. I'll be honest, in some instances, even just a last name and a general idea of the area, can really sort of like, oh, okay, Kings are from these particular communities. In this particular area, there's certain last names that are really predominant. Mm-hmm. So, even just minuscule amounts in the hands of the right folks can point you in the right direction.
That's great. And I guess the second part of that question would be what could be, I guess, the challenges on a person's journey with identity if they don't. It's huge, and I don't want to make, you know what I mean? Like, I'll just sum that up in a minute. Because I know that's a big.
It's really hard. Identity, I've worked with a lot of youth across the country, and identity is something that is individual to every single one of us. I know for me growing up, I grew up in Toronto, hugely multicultural, area, had connections to family. When I was in high school, we moved to Newmarket, and then suddenly I went from this huge population, that very ethnically diverse, to being like one of 10 in the high school when I started of kids that were racialized. I wanted to be anything but Indigenous, because that made me stand out. It wasn't until I was pretty much done my high school career that I was definitely more comfortable with being who I was, and reconnecting through college. And then, when I became a mom, and that's because I didn't want my son to kind of go through the same, like, who am I struggles that, that I did. When it comes to identity, I mean, as parents, all you can be is supportive, you know, and help access the tools and resources that you know, your child feels that they need to navigate that. You know, there's lots of folks, you know, even in my own family, like I identify as Anishinaabe Kwe. You know, even within my family, there's different ways of identifying, you know, some feel more connected than others. But making sure that they have the space and they have your support's the most important thing that you could do.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. So this past November, we ran a campaign that focused on language matters. And since then, we're incorporating that idea like throughout our resources and information and social media and everything. We're trying to incorporate language matters on not just in a month campaign, but on the day-to-day. So why the words we choose matter, and maybe there's words we should unlearn or remove from our vocabulary altogether. So in your opinion, in the context of identity, or even more generally when talking about adoption or family, are there words or wherever you want to go with this, are there words we should re-examine or remove from everyday speak? And on the flip side, is there other language and words we should be promoting more when we're talking?
Oh boy, do I ever have a laundry list. I think like I said before, I think the first one is, you know, Indigenous, recognizing that Indigenous is the umbrella term. If you are aware, you know, you can use First Nations, Metis, Inuit. You can go and even farther down from that, you know, we have First Nations. Like I said, we have 630 representing like 50 nations. I am, you know, Anishinaabe, which is a First Nation. So I think that is important. I think a lot of the information that is out there just kind of lumps all Indigenous people together. And, you know, while in some instances that's incredibly appropriate, in other instances it's not. I tend to avoid words like Aboriginal and Indian unless they're attached to specific names of things. You know, Aboriginal, you know, it's abnormal. You know, it implies that, you know, there's implications there that we're not the first original peoples, what have you. Indian, I'm not sure that I really need to explain that one so much. You know, they're both really outdated ultimately. You know, that being said, some of our community, especially the older community, do use them. You know, for those of you that, you know, potentially work in office settings, you know, I think one of the things that you might be familiar with is like hearing a meeting being referred to as a powwow. And for anyone who has actually been to a powwow, that just doesn't make sense. But it's just so ingrained in our vocabulary. You know, other times things is words are co-opted by pop culture, like spirit animal, tribe, or you know, the biggest one, the one that's really hard for me even to say is a racial slur, savage. You know, we have phrases like circling the wagons, the natives are getting restless, lowest man on the totem pole. You know, there are things that are a little more overt and often, you know, being played off as being funny or ignorance. Like I think about, for anyone who's a little bit older and, you know, looking at a lot of the old Disney movies on how Indigenous folks are portrayed and how we were made to talk, you know, mocking our speech, or just asking questions like, hey, do you live in a teepee still? It's like, no, I actually live in a townhouse, but thank you. So, you know, there's lots of words that, you know, a lot of folks don't recognize where the root of them really comes from. So you can certainly do more research. Obviously, I just touched the surface on language. I could probably do an entire session just on language alone.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too that, you know, this is not just something in the past, like this is ongoing, because for many white people, they're culturally exposed to maybe Indigenous culture through movies or Hollywood, which depicts these stereotypes. And I know we're getting a little off topic, but it's not really off topic, because even just this week, I'm sure everybody's seen it because it's gone viral. There was a cheerleading competition in Disney. I mean, so it's very present in the today. So it just, affirms the point that you still have to do your own research and make sure that you're not, culturally appropriating or offending people by just saying.
And I think the other piece of that too is recognizing that times have changed, and we need to change with them. Mm-hmm. So things that may have been more appropriate, or I won't say, because it's something, I'm gonna be honest, that whole Disney thing isn't appropriate at all.
No, there's nothing appropriate about that at all.
There's nothing appropriate at all, but more, so I don't want to say socially acceptable, but you can't do things that you did 30 years ago. Now we have to move forward. Again, I could do an entire topic on Native mascots, and we could talk definitely about how we're portrayed in especially historic films. We've certainly got a lot better with representation. Growing up, I had very little representation, and I speak about this quite often. I've had Tatanka the wrestler. For anyone who's out there that's roughly my age, you'll remember that. I had North of 60, which was an amazing show, but I did not live up north. Like I said, I lived urban. So a lot of the things were relevant in some ways, but not relevant in others. The only musician at the time was Susan Aglukark, which, she's an amazing Inuk artist, but again, I'm not a Inuk. And then we had, the Disney variations and Pocahontas, which is a whole other problem.
Whole other snack and chat. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the takeaway there is for parents or caregivers, like to maybe put, like, I'm sure, they're already doing this, but put in the time to seek out representation, right? So that the children are seeing.
I would say not just representation, Indigenous representation by Indigenous people.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I think, that's one of those things now we certainly have a lot more of. And I think one of your later questions kind of touches on that. So I'll zip it for now.
All right. But that's great. I like that list, and we should all be working on our own list too. So maybe we could just switch gears a bit, and you can share some information about the Family Center and the work that you're doing there, and the importance of that work.
Yeah. So Nshwaasnangong Childcare and Family Center. It's Indigenous led. The community started working on this back in 2016, puts our values and teachings at its core. This is the priority in the licensed childcare. We offer space for up to 88 children. I think we're sitting at about 50 right now, from ages 0 to 6. We focus on connections to language, teachings throughout the curriculum, working towards revitalizing culture as much as we can. We know at the Family Center especially that it takes a large circle and support to raise little people in our lives. We definitely try to foster those connections through the Family Center. Wherever you happen to be on your journey, whether you're reconnecting your foster or adoptive parent, we try to make sure that the space is as inclusive as possible. We have non-Indigenous families that live in the community as well that come out and join us regularly for programming. So like I said before, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and you can see we post programming weekly on those social medias, and then we use Eventbrite to register. And we're doing that right now just simply because of the pandemic. We're trying to make sure that we are staying within low numbers, being that, our little people 0 to 6 can't be vaccinated. We just want to make sure that we're mindful that we're not having 60 people in the building at any given time. But yeah, we have lots of, early on child, youth, and family culturally relevant programming. As you know, like we just opened up November of last year. There's lots of really great plans to do more as we open up and grow. So I'm looking forward to where the next several years are going to take us.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I will be posting the links to, in case anybody's wondering, I will post the links in the chat later. So if you want to check out the Facebook page or the Instagram account to learn more, and just keep up with what they're doing. So when thinking of transracial families, can you talk a little bit about the impacts of cultural competency? Okay, this you might have the wrong term there, but what are some things that parents can do to support their kids who do not have a family center like yours in their city? Oh yeah, that's my next question. Sorry. So let's just talk about that.
Okay, yeah.
I got ahead of myself there.
I recognize that not every community has an Indigenous-led childcare and family center. I know this because we're pretty unique,
Yeah.
and building out the center, we're one of a handful. But there's lots of other ways to connect. So many communities have friendship centers and Indigenous organizations that you can connect to. And I encourage you to explore what's in your particular area, connect, because through community connections leads to additional and more organic opportunities for children to connect. The main piece of advice that I can give, non-Indigenous family members is that you're going to want to, put your ego aside. Sometimes it can, connecting in Indigenous spaces, you may not be welcomed right away. You will have to put in the work just like you do with any kind of relationship building with people. They don't know who you are. They don't know the connection. They don't know that you're coming to whatever it is that you're coming to, to learn, to foster that the identity of the child in your care. It's going to take some work. I think that's why I said, your ego is going to be one of those things that you'll want to, keep in check and recognize, why am I here? Oh, I'm here because of this particular child. I'm not here because of me. And kind of once you kind of connect and you have, friends and folks in the community who know you, things certainly get a lot easier. Things open up opportunity wise, not just, for your child, but also, for you as well.
That's great advice. Thank you. So we're coming back to cultural competency. I was getting really excited about my next question. So it's a term that we're seeing and hearing more and more. And in fact, we recently had a speaker provide a webinar for us, which was cultural competency, for adoptive families. And now she clearly stated in the workshop that, just by attending a workshop or listening to a webinar does not make you culturally competent, that it's a lifelong process. And you need to constantly be reflecting on your biases and privileges. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on one, just the language of cultural competency, and two, what can white parents and caregivers do? I know you just touched on this. Just to reassure them, you're not just there to check a box. But I think you talked about that before, about building that relationship, leaving your ego at the door.
Yeah, I think the biggest part of this is recognizing that a lot of the education that you've received on Indigenous folks is so biased or completely incorrect, and it's not your fault. Much of what you've learned about Indigenous folks is largely whitewashed. It's written largely by those within the dominant society. which, at the time perpetuated privilege and views that they have. Of course, you're going to, have certain biases and, incorrect knowledge. Ultimately what is the dominant culture's justification for whatever it is that it's done. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the truth. Many of you likely endured history classes in which Indigenous folks were referred to in the past tense. Admittedly, I was in said history class in high school where I was sitting there going, and my teacher was talking about Indigenous folks, and I was sitting right there and having like this huge, I'm right here. What are you talking about? Like, we're not all, dead or what have you. But lots of things like smallpox blankets, the Indian Act, treaties, reservations, the pass system, residential school, largely hasn't been taught, coupled with stereotypes that we've talked about a little bit that come in through media, news, television, movies. Many folks are just starting to do that, learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that takes a lot of strength and courage. It's a lot harder than holding on to false, outdated, or plain wrong knowledge. It's not easy work, but I don't want anyone to be discouraged by that. To touch on exactly what she said, your learning doesn't start and end in a day. That being said, there's lots of ways to immerse yourself every day in learning opportunities where and when you can. There's lots more resources nowadays. You can, do things passively by diversifying just your social media. You can read Indigenous authors, both children-focused and adult books. You can listen to podcasts and music, watch Indigenous-focused television and movies. There's way more out there than what there used to be. Coming at it from a point where you're integrating it into as much of your life as you can, for the benefit of the child that's in your care. I think what a lot of folks don't realize is it doesn't just benefit the child, it also benefits you. So
absolutely,
that kind of
right. There's so much out there, and with the internet there really is no excuse.
Yeah, but also that's where you're getting, your resources from. Yeah.
It's important to check.
Be mindful that you definitely want Indigenous led or created resources. There's still, as I learned this year, I've actually signed up for a course where it was, Indigenous identity in the land. Thought it'd be really great to help me navigate some of the programming, and I ended up withdrawing from the course within 3 weeks because it was harmful. Wow. And so just being mindful, like who, if you're signing up for different professional development opportunities, like who's leading it? Are they Indigenous? What's their background? When you're talking about books, like it's a book about Indigenous people, but is it written by Indigenous people? Because there's lots of different books and resources that are out there that are about us, but not written or from our perspectives. They're very much from the colonial lens. Agreed.
It's always important to look into the source of where that information is coming from. So at the very beginning, when I introduced you, we mentioned that you do workshops and other consulting. So do you want, if someone's watching and they want to get in touch, and how would somebody do that, or what's the best way to get in touch with you?
If they can reach out to you. You have all of my my information.
I do.
Alternatively, folks can email me at franceselizabethmoore@gmail.com. Frances with an E, not an I, because I'm not male. I am on social media. Facebook likes to eat message requests. Okay. So if you are sending a invite to connect, just make sure that you also send a message just so I can kind of line them up and whatnot. I will be honest, there's a lot of pending folks. I'm like, I don't know where you're from. That I just kind of let folks sit in pending purgatory until I can kind of place them. I do tend to use LinkedIn and Twitter. Both of those, Chantel has if you can't seem to locate me.
Okay, sounds great. So we're just going to wrap up because we're getting close to the hour mark, but I always like to leave time at the end. So if there's any last message or information, anything that you want to share with the community before we say goodbye.
This is a big one. I think ultimately you aren't going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. It's 110% inevitable. But I don't want you to fear making mistakes so much that it paralyzes you. It's directed to each of you, regardless of whatever your race or ethnic background is. We all live in this society, which is very much based in white supremacy. This means that any person, even one in an oppressed group, even in a racialized person, can cause harm to another by upholding those systems of oppression. Many BIPOC folks doing this work, we aren't perfect. I shared with Chantel, earlier, I am far more knowledgeable now than I was 10 years ago and 20 years before that. It's, lifelong. I think when it comes to, Indigenous folks and anybody doing, diversity and inclusion and equity, the difference is many of us have been doing it a lot longer, purely out of necessity. We have an invested interest. I was saying, to Chantal, like, I really started doing more community stuff after my son was born, and a lot of the work that I do is with him and the next 7 generations in mind. I'm, mom to a beautiful 16-year-old boy. I'm auntie to dozens of Indigenous kids. And I don't want them to have the same conversations that I've been having for 20 years. I'd like to see some progress, things like, please don't dress as me for Halloween. It's not a conversation that I've been having since I was 17 and I am no longer 17. So ideally I'd like them to pick up new conversations that can move us forward. But that means that we need to put things to bed, like the whole Disney situation. That they were told that they couldn't wear headdresses, but the group themselves is called the Indianettes, and their chant referred to scalping people. And it's like, okay,
How that was okay.
How that was okay.
Disney,
right?
that Disney was okay with that.
Right, but there was one piece of the puzzle. So, being mindful that it's a journey, and even ourselves, we have work to do. I think the Indigenous community, I'm seeing it play out right now. We can be really anti-Black at times, and for me, I struggle with that because I have mixed race relations that are Afro-Indigenous or Black natives, or however, everybody's, like I said before, people refer to themselves differently. Yeah. I never want to harm them. And I can absolutely do better. I think, as a community, that's one way we can move forward. But, it improves this work that we do and the work that you will be doing. We have an invested interest in it. You now have invested interests, with children in your care. It improves our lives, but it also improves yours. And I think, if anyone who has done some diving on, how colonization has, impacted marginalized communities, it's also harmed your, Western communities as well. The connections, it's far more individualistic as opposed to being, the pandemic. I think we see it when it comes to community care. So I think that would be my one big thing is like, just recognize you're not going to be perfect. It's going to take time. You're going to mess up. It's how you handle messing up. And kind of take it in stride and recognize that you're going to fall if you get back up and keep trying. I hope so.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's important to note, like, if you are not striving for perfection, but you're striving to learn and do better, so that when somebody does correct a mistake or point out a mistake, that you're open to learning about, why you made that mistake and how you cannot make that mistake again, and then teaching other people if they make that mistake, right?
Absolutely. That's part of being an ally is doing that work, and recognizing that, you have a bit of a power and privilege in being an ally. You're going to reach folks that I can't reach. There's lots of folks that are, out there that simply aren't going to listen to me because they don't respect me. However, if I reach one person and then, someone who is connected to them, who wouldn't listen to me, listens to them, baby steps and baby steps, and, improvement is improvement. Progress takes a lot longer than I would like it to, to be honest with you. But as I'm getting older, I'm recognizing that small progress is still progress. As much as I would love to see, great progress overnight, we're not going to get there. The best way that we can move forward is largely through education.
Yeah. So we'll leave it at that. Frances, I want to thank you for your honesty and being so candid with us and sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. It's really been great for me. I'm sure it's been great for everybody watching too. We really appreciate it. Well, I guess we'll just say bye for now. We touched on a lot of things, and I think we just, open the communication, and we'd love to have you back someday to keep talking about these important topics. Okay, well, I'm going to say goodbye for now, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions about our discussion today, or even specific questions for Frances, just put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. And take care of yourselves, and well, bye for now.